Hey guys, welcome back to another week of Ticket Tuesday. I'm your host, Ronan TameHD. So yeah, this is going to be a great time. Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of Ticket Tuesday. I'm your host, Ronan TameHD, and this week we watched The Grave of the Fireflies, released in 1988, directed and written, I believe, by Isao Takahata, and who is a legend, co-founder of Studio Ghibli, absolutely incredible anime director. But I will say, this movie was, what a fucking downer. This is probably one of the most depressing movies I've ever seen. And not to knock on it, that is entirely the point of the movie. And I don't even know, what to say, aside from just wait till we get to the review, and this was a great movie, but it wasn't an enjoyable one, and that's by intention. But before I go on a whole tangent about why this movie was good, I'll tell you why it was good and more back at the house.
ホタルみたいやね。
そうやな。せや、ホタル捕まえよか。
Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of Ticket Tuesday. I'm your host, Ronan TameHD, and this week we watched Grave of the Fireflies, released in 1988, based on the short story of the same name. It is written and directed by Isao Takahata, I believe I said his name correctly, and this film was his first of, many co-productions of Studio Ghibli, which is a studio that he co-founded with a lot of Japanese anime legends, including him. This film is just a straight-up drama. Now, some would consider it a war movie. I, myself, would not. Although I could understand where they're coming from calling it a war movie, I wouldn't. Now, this film, before I get into the very big, depressing elephant in the room, I'm going to talk about more uplifting things before I get into the miserable things. So this film, for starters, being a Ghibli film, it was beautifully animated. I mean, the environment, the watercolor backgrounds, just how the way the characters moved was very natural. The fireflies themselves, they were very nice. Those scenes were very nice, beautiful. The writing was great, directing, dialogue, the characters really felt, it was very grounded, I guess is a good way to put it, right? The characters were very well put together, I guess. They talked naturally. They felt like, younger kids, the way they talked, the way they spoke, the way they sung, the way they acted. And I think overall the film was just your typical beautiful Ghibli fare. I feel like most of Ghibli's films are absolute beauties to look at. An example of why, in my opinion, 2D animation is just so timeless and why I don't think it'll ever age. But, with that being said, I think you can't talk about this movie without talking about how miserable the film is. Now, I understand that the director, Isao Takahata, has talked about how the film was not intended to be a tragedy, that you were not intended to cry at the end of the film, because at the beginning he showed that both protagonists were dead, that you knew they were going to die, so he hoped that that would dampen the effect of that. But even though we know they're going to die, we still have to watch the build-up. We have to watch them starving to death. We have to watch them scraping by in a cave, right? We have to watch them just be miserable for a good majority of the movie, even when they're not in the cave and starving to death, right? I think that this film, and I do understand that the director did not intend for this movie to be a tragedy, it still was, right? And I just think that although this film is incredibly heartbreaking, right? I think this is genuinely the most heartbreaking and most miserable Ghibli film I've ever seen, and that's a compliment, right? I'm not saying that I expected this movie to be all sunshine and rainbows. I didn't. But even at the end, I'm like, man, it just made me think, and I think one thing I really liked about this movie was that the reason is its message, right? You might be asking, what is the message? Obviously, the film was not made just to be miserable, right? It obviously had a message. Movies like this usually have pretty deep meanings. And this film, I think, was a very big anti-totalitarianism movie. It was very kind of anti-Japan in a way. And even though some people would call this an anti-war movie, the director himself has come out and said that it is not an anti-war movie in the slightest. There is no such thing in the movie. Is not an anti-war movie. Obviously, it could be a byproduct of the actual message of the movie. You know, obviously, the war in the movie caused the bad things to happen, but it doesn't directly say that war is bad, or that's not the message. The message is that, you know, Japan, the way it operated, was a problem, right? Because what killed these kids is people's just like blind loyalty to the empire, right? I mean, the entire reason that Senta, I believe is how you say his name. Sorry, I'm probably butchering all these names. The reason him and his daughter, his sister, Setsuko. I'm very sorry. I don't speak Japanese, obviously, as you can tell. But the entire reason they left his aunt's house because his mother was killed in a firebombing in his hometown. So he had to move with close relatives, or at least far relatives. He had to move in with them after the death of his mother and the destruction of his village, or his town, or whatever. But she was such an asshole, right? It seemed fine at first, but then she was like fucking being a really big hard ass. She would always say, oh, you should work for your country. You know, you can't even eat in here because, you know, you're old enough to be a firefighter. You're this, you're that. You should, you know, you should be a soldier, this and that. Like, just fucking, just giving him shit all the time. And I can understand for, like, what, a ninth grader, like a teenager, that would get old after a while, right? Just having your aunt bust your balls all the time. Just being like, oh, you should work for your country. You know, you're stupid. You don't share your food. And you're like a teenager with your 4-year-old sister. Like, and when she's crying that her mother died, because she's not stupid. She's 4, and she might not have a fully developed brain, but she's not dumb. So the later in the movie, they revealed that the aunt told her, didn't tell Saita that she told his sister that their mother had died. But, like, she was crying that her mother was dead. And the only thing that the aunt was concerned about, oh, you're waking us all up. All you know, you live here for free and you don't do anything. And the least you could do is, you know, shut your sister up or whatever. Maybe it wasn't that mean, but it was basically that mean. Right? And you can understand why he didn't want to fucking live there anymore. Because he couldn't even play the piano without getting yelled at. Right? And, I mean, obviously, he lived in a cave. And he was just a kid, too, right? He didn't know what the fuck he was doing. But it all wraps back around to blind loyalty to Japan. You gotta work for the man. You know, you gotta help be a cog in the machine if you want to be anything in life. That's basically the message of the movie, is to not do that. I mean, I remember the director, a quote from him, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe he said that the message of the movie is that our main character, Saita, tried to escape that life, tried to escape being a part of the machine, tried to escape that family, and just tried to live out nature, and it killed him. Right? He was punished for not operating as a part of the machine. Right? And it's kind of anti-Japan because the country is what killed him, right? And he was basically talking about how, at least at the time that he said it, maybe it's different, I don't know what it is, I'm not Japanese, but he said at the time that he said this quote, that Japan hadn't really changed from this time, right? They said they'd changed, but they hadn't. They were saying that kids needed to get in line, right? They needed to conform, they needed to be a part of the machine, right? And that's scary that now, obviously, we sympathize with Saita and his sister, that, you know, they were in a tough situation, and they were just a victim of circumstance, right? They were in a very unfortunate situation that they couldn't control, right? And we feel sympathy for them. But if culture were to reverse, we wouldn't feel sympathy for them. We would essentially feel sympathy for the country, because they're like, oh, they should have just worked for the country. Right? Oh, they should have just, you know, been a soldier or been a firefighter or whatever, or like done whatever for the country, because, oh, that's what a citizen's for, is to be a cog in the machine, and that's all we're good for, right? And just serve the country from the beginning of your life to the end of your life. That is your entire purpose. And that's a scary thought, right? Because a human is more than just I guess, a screw in a machine, right? We should be more than that. We're human beings. We're independent. We should be able to do what we want. But if we're told by everybody that, oh, you should just do this, do that, conform, it's a scary thing that we might feel more sympathy for our country than ourselves, I guess, is a scary thing. I'm sorry if I'm getting a little political or philosophical here, but that is essentially the message of the movie. Is kind of, I guess, as I said, anti-totalitarianism, anti-empire, anti-Japan. And I think it's very powerful, right? Obviously, I think tragic stories like this, I think, are a lot better, maybe not better, but they're a lot more memorable at getting their point across, right? Because obviously if this movie had ended with like, oh, his dad didn't die in the war, and he actually came back and he survived, and it's all good now, and now they're fine. Like, it was like, oh yeah, all this bad stuff happened, but it ended good anyway. The dad was here and they lived, but it didn't end that way. It was more realistic because bad shit happens all the time in life, and I get that shit happens as a kind of bad way to describe it, but I mean, bad things happen all the time. I can guarantee you several stories, maybe even thousands of similar situations have happened just like this. Kids losing their parents, having to fend for themselves in a world that just tosses them aside, right? And I can totally see, and I guarantee you stories like this have happened or are happening right now. And stories like this, people just don't want to talk about. They just want to look away. Right? They wouldn't want to talk about stories like this because they want to hear good stories. They don't want to be down. And yeah, this movie is a downer, but I think a lot of people should watch this movie because, yes, it's a hard watch. Yes, it's sad. Yes, it's uncomfortable, but that's the point. That's the point of the movie. The point of the movie is to show you how fucked up it is. And, I mean, it's not, I mean, maybe not, but it's, point is, it's trying to get a point across, is what I'm trying to say, and that you should watch this movie. I think most film fans, even if you're not a film fan, I think a lot of people should at least watch this movie once in their lifetime, because I think it is a very important movie, and I think it's more important than anything I'll ever say on this channel, and I just think you should watch it, because as I said, things like this have happened, will happen, and will continue to happen, and I just think that it's a really good movie that you should take time out of your, and I'm not saying maybe you should just watch them on your own time. I'm not really even saying you should watch this with friends or family, because you might just make them sad. But maybe you can. Maybe you could find, I mean, I wouldn't say this movie is enjoyable, but I would recommend it on the fact that it is just such a good movie. It's so important that I believe you should still watch it, and I believe that it is absolutely worth your time. And with that being said, I think I would rate this film a 9 out of 10. And, yeah, I think I've said what I'd say. Think it was a piece. So, guys, if you like this video, share with friends, subscribe, turn the notifications on, comment below if you liked it. And I've been Rowan Tamashi, off to take shelter in the bunker. So, one thing, that I liked about this movie, well, I don't know. It's hard. I guess it's hard to talk about, because, as I said, sad movies are usually hard to watch anyway, but it's just like, this is the last thing I expected from Studio Ghibli, because, their movies are usually pretty happy, and, I wouldn't say glamorized, but they're usually kind of fantasy-ish, even when they're just, like, slice-of-life movies that don't have any fantastical elements. Usually they are pretty, like, whimsical in their nature. Right? But this movie is, like, anti-whimsy, right? And again, that's not a bad thing. I think that's by intention. But still, it's a lot. I gotta lie down or something, man. It's a lot. So, I was watching this movie, right? And before, I knew the premise of the movie. I knew it was, like, during World War II time in Japan. And it was, the aftermath of that. And it was about two people trying to survive. But I didn't know what I was getting into. So after the movie, I'm like, man, I was in a good mood today. And now it's just like, I just want to lie down and just, like, think about some things. And if I was in a bad mood today, I don't even know if I'd have trouble going to bed tonight. I'm not even lying. Like, this shit was depressing. It's a good movie though, very well made. Definitely got its point across. I'll tell you that much.